Forgive me. I am 18 minutes late. But, and I forgot my glasses. So, we're keeping with history and politics. And I try to keep, I try to stay a positive person. And of course, in history and politics, we're talking about the political events that are currently happening and the history behind those events to add the a historical context to the events themselves. And we do this at 9 o'clock, Monday through Thursday. I am trying to mix up where I get these sources from. This comes directly from the White House. Now, the title in bold is Protecting Civil Rights, Expanding Individual Opportunity. All right. Today, Donald J. Trump has signed a historic executive order that protects the civil rights of all Americans and expands individual opportunity by terminating radical DEI preferences in federal contracting and directing federal agencies to relentlessly combat private sector discrimination. It forces long-standing federal statutes and it enforces long-standing federal statutes and faithfully advances the Constitution's promise of a colorblind equality before the law. This is a comprehensive order that is the most important federal civil rights measure in decades. It terminates diversity, equity, and inclusion, discriminating in federal workforce and federal contracting. Federal hiring, promotions, and performance reviews will reward individual initiative, skill, performance, and hard work, not under circumstances, DEI related factors, goals, policies, and mandates. It requires OMB to streamline federal contracting process and to enhance speed and efficiency, reduce costs, blah, 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 blah. Okay. For all white people that feel that history is not whitewashed, I'm going to explain this to you in real time. It said that the executive order protects the civil rights of all Americans and expands the individual opportunities by terminating radical DEI preferencing in the federal contracting and directing federal agencies to relentlessly combat private sector discrimination. So we don't want private sector relentlessly combating discrimination. We don't want that. Okay. And it enforces long-standing federal statutes that faithfully advances the Constitution's promise of a colorblind equality before the law. When the Constitution was written, we were having a Native American genocide. Women couldn't vote, and black people were slaves. So it wasn't colorblind, it was color specific, white. All right. 2, colorblind means I don't see color. That is not a gift from white people, because historically, white people by majority have shown that they lack the ability or sensitivity to remember or recognize circumstances of people who don't look like them. That's just a historical fact. So when you say, I don't see color as an American white person, that doesn't help people who are non-white in this country. Because what that says is I don't see the things that are connected to your color. I don't see redlining. I don't see improper and imbalanced policing. I don't see the inequities of the war on drugs. I don't see the miseducation. I don't see segregation. I don't see redlining. I don't see mortgage withholding. I don't see the disproportionate outcomes in severity of arrests and imprisonment times. I don't see that this particular group has had wealth withheld from them longer than this particular group. So it's not an even playing field. That's why there's a wealth gap, because for the first 250 years of this country, women could not participate and they could not develop and build assets. So even once they got white women got even in 1920, which the rest of the women did not get full citizenship until 1965, 45 years later, moving forward from that point, there is still the gap that men have had all of this time. And we can say the same thing about Black people. We can say the same thing about Native Americans. So when I see a Native American, I don't see their color and I don't see the things that distinguish who they are. I just see their current circumstance. I'm judging it without a degree of history. So when you say I don't see color, they're saying I don't see history. And history brings about circumstance, which is why white people don't want to forget the Holocaust, which is why white people don't want to forget the United States Constitution, which is why they don't want to forget about the Bill of Rights, which is why they don't want to forget about the Gettysburg Address. Because there are things that happen in your history that create your present. But for whatever reason, it's very selective in this country. Now, again, this is from the White House, and this is saying that it's doing something for all Americans, which means the Constitution works for all Americans, and it doesn't. It never has. That's why it has to have been changed. And why was it changed? Because it didn't work for everybody. They're called amendments. So, here's the biggest thing about this. Because Trump's Trump. That's low-hanging fruit. All of the white Americans who believe that they are good people, and if they were around the time of slavery, that they would not have participated, or if they were there in the 60s, they would have been marching along with the Black folks, blah, 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 if that's who you are. With the movements that are being done by the current administration, and again, I don't think that the Democrats would do any differently. I don't think that the independents would do any differently. The Green Party would do any differently. I am not a anti-Trump or anti-conservative. I don't think any of the politics really have any advantage to Black people. But all of these white people who have convinced themselves that they would not be a part of history and they would be the ones who stood up, or they would be the ones who spoke out, you would be doing back then exactly what you're doing now. Nothing. When you hear Black people say most white people don't care or they agree, and it's no, most white people aren't like that. Yeah, they are, because look, nobody's saying anything about this. There should be no question that the Constitution, which has been in place since 1792, has not equally represented all of the people in it, or everybody that it's covered. It does represent the people that's in it, because the people that's in it was just rich white men. That was the people that was in it. And then the states wouldn't ratify it, so they had to come back with the amendments to fix it. So Trump is a mirror of the American citizen. When American white people are losing their ability to say history was wrong and that whites are misrepresented, when the White House is putting out propaganda that says they're removing DEI out of legislation from 1965, DEI is something they just made up. DEI is the new CRT. In 1965, there was no DEI. It was affirmative action, which was 65 years difference. That is not the same legislation. It's not the same idea. DEI came out of the George Floyd movement, 2020. So you're not removing DEI in anything. But it is so funny how white America, and I'm just calling it what it is. I'm just calling it what it is. This is not, it just is what it is. This is white America getting a green light to be white America. And everybody in white America that's just sitting and watching, you are a part of it. No different than slavery. It's no different than the civil rights movement when you sat back and watched that. There's no difference in the war on drugs when you sat back and watched that. There's no different in slavery or convict leasing or segregation, Plessy versus Ferguson, when you sat back and watched that. When are the American people just going to suck it up and say, okay, I see exactly why we are who we are? And just stop saying that that's not us. Yes, that's white America. That has always been white America, historically. I didn't write the history books. It just is what it is. Because I don't have a problem with a party putting forth racist propaganda. But if most of the country were not racist, there would be outrage. There would be outrage on George Floyd levels. We've seen outrage. Football players taking a knee. Oh, white people let it be known that bothered them. But not making sure that private sector and public sectors don't discriminate. Is there anybody that has read a history book that does not know the history of discrimination in this country? Restoring the values of individual dignity, hard work, and excellence. So you're saying if we're making sure that inequities that were put in place are removed, that's what it takes for white people to have dignity? That's what it takes for white people to work hard, and that's what it takes for white people to have excellence? Or is that saying that black people only get dignity, hard work, and excellence? If you... It doesn't make sense. Where was the dignity? Because you're saying before this was put in place in 1965 that black people apparently were dignified and rewarded for their hard work and allowed to see excellence in their performance before those things were put in place. Why did they put them in place? Individual dignity, hard work, and excellence are fundamental to American greatness. Native American genocide? 40% of the population in poverty? 1% of the population owning 90% of the country's wealth. So hard work, really? Because that includes white people too. And this is the sad part. This is the biggest sad part. Poor white people are part of the slaveocracy as well. So when they, DEI, this goes back to Bacon's Rebellion. If you think I'm lying, look it up. 1676. Nathaniel Bacon gets upset with the British governor because he wants to do a higher level of business. They won't let him do it. He gets all of the poor people, black, white, native, male, female, everybody, and they turn against the poor people, go after the rich people for over a year. England has to come, put it out. And England asks the colonial leadership, how are we going to make sure this doesn't happen again? And they say, we're going to divide and conquer the poor people. And we're not going to elevate the poor whites. We're going to drop everybody else. And we're going to, for the first time, recognize a unifying identity in Europeans. And that was the first time the word whiteness came up in legislation and where it had an empirical value. It is called the Anti-Miscegenation Laws of 1681. Look it up. First time white came up as an identification with privilege. It's also where white privilege came from. Whites could own guns, Native Americans and blacks couldn't. Whites could own land, Native Americans and blacks couldn't. So that was the privilege associated with whiteness. And the Naturalization Act of 1790 said for you to be a citizen of the United States, you have to be white. So, on this legislation that went in place for white people, no one at the White House understands that there was wealth built in that period. And this was not to repair the wealth. This was to reduce it moving forward. They're saying we don't even want the reduction there, let alone the repair. So, I challenge all of our white Americans that is looking at what's happening in their country. I'm not making it up. And it's happening. It's the same thing happening over and over again. No different. FDR, making sure the Social Security didn't pay for the jobs that black people had. Made sure that the New Deal really didn't apply to black people. This is par for the course, right? So I'm just saying, right now in real time, where are the good white people that are so offended when they hear people say all white people are racist? Where are you now? Where are you? Where's the picketing? Where's the protest? Where are the scholars? Where is everybody? Again, please like, share, subscribe. Most of all, think.